It's okay. O której zaczynamy? Okay.
We are live.
Already.
Yes.
Yes.
So, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. On behalf of the local organizers, I would like to warmly welcome you to our first plenary session, Bridging Memory Studies Across Languages. It has been conceptualized and prepared by POSOCOMES working group within the MSA with the support of European Network Remembrance and Solidarity. It will touch on the very important issue of memory research existing within various European and global languages and cultures, and their subjectivity in a globalizing world. So I wish you all an interesting and fruitful discussion, and pass the microphone to the chairs, Lena Loverncic and Misha Gabovic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a nice introduction. I am Lana Lovrencic. I'm an art historian from Zagreb, from Institute of Art History. And I would like also to introduce my colleague, Misha Gabovic, a historian and sociologist from Einstein Forum in Potsdam.
Thank you, Lana. And before we start with the actual discussion, I would just like to say a few words about POSOCOMES. So POSOCOMES is the working group on post-socialist and comparative memory studies within the MSA. It was founded at the end of 2018 and very quickly and unexpectedly became the largest and most active working group within the Memory Studies Association. We've organized countless panels. We organized our own 2-week conference online last year and are now preparing another one in Tallinn in 2023. We have a monthly online seminar, we have a bibliography team, a regular newsletter, and various other things. If you're interested in learning more about our activities, or maybe even in joining the group, I would invite you to join the Working in Regional Groups Roundtable that will take place tomorrow, or even the POSOCOMES business meeting that will take place at 9:30 a.m. Warsaw time on Thursday, or simply go to our website, which is posocomes.org.
So before we start, we would like just to add that we are really limited with our time. There are really interesting topics that we are going to cover today. So we wanted just to note that there is a question and answer option that you can use throughout the panel discussion. If you are listening via Drifta, then you can use the chat box. And if you are streaming via Facebook or YouTube channel, you can use the comment section and pose your questions. We will monitor them, and then if we have time, we will definitely include some of them in the discussion. And if not, the chat option via Drifta will stay open after the panel, after the streaming is over, so the answering of every question will be possible even later on.
So now I would like to very briefly introduce our truly stellar and extremely interdisciplinary and international group of participants. In fact, we just realized that we are covering literally half of the planet, all the time zones from Chile to Korea. So in the interest of time, I will not list everyone's wonderful achievements and publications, etc., but just mention their discipline and location. So we have Alicia Salomone, who's a literary and cultural scholar at the University of Chile, and until recently a member of the executive committee of the MSA. We have Jae-Hyun Lim, a historian at Sogang University in Seoul, and I believe the main organizer of next year's MSA conference, which will take place in Seoul. We have Cornelia Conchal, also a historian based at the Ludwigs-Maximilians-Universität in Munich. We have Magdalena Heidel, a philologist and translator at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. And finally, Samer Al-Nasir, a legal historian and social psychologist based at the UNED in Spain.
So I would like to give us an introduction to our first topic. The first question we will discuss, we named it Lost in Translation. And here we would like our panelists to discuss different problems that we encounter when we want to translate expression on context that cannot be easily translated into other languages, but also problems that we encounter since the memory studies have emerged in German, French, and English-speaking academia, and what are the consequences for other languages, big ones such as Hispanic or non-European or Indo-European languages such as Arabic. So Magdalena, please, could you please start with your notions on this topic?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this wonderful panel. I'm really honored and very much interested in what is going to be the outcome of our exchange. Now, I'm a translator scholar, so for me, a question of the loss in translation inevitably means that I feel uncomfortable and a little bit unhappy, because I don't believe that translation is just about loss. And I think that it's not enough to speak about loss or gain, for that matter, in translation. Since the 1990s, when the process known as the cultural turn in translation studies was initiated and developed, we know that what happens in translation actually is not a linguistic procedure that lets us understand what other people are saying in their languages, but it's a cultural process which lets us understand other people as human beings. So to cut this longer story very, very short, I would say that it's good to think about translation in very broad theoretical framework of hermeneutics on the one hand, but also of cultural studies on the other hand. And what George Steiner, the philosopher and translator and philologist, said, that translation is actually conditio humana, is very, very true. And I find it more and more true since I've been working with some topics in memory studies. I'm not a specialist in memory studies, but I'm working with my friend and colleague, Professor Roma Sendyka from the Jagiellonian. And we've been doing research together on how memory and translation intertwine and how they work together and how they, how they illuminate. I'm hesitating because it's illumination and shadowing at the same time. But actually, I think that when we deal with memory, when we deal with testimonial, what the material we have at hand is something that actually deserves translation, calls for translation. But on the other hand, it is untranslatable in a very basic way, right? Because it's not just a bit of language, a text, but it is an existential experience, and so it calls for translation and it denies translation. It's a very, very difficult and very, very interesting, very, very difficult object, but on the other hand, a fascinating subject for study. And I would just want to use up my remaining 3 minutes by talking briefly about the project we are working on at the Jagiellonian, which is a very simple thing. We decided we wanted to put down, to transcribe, and then to translate into English the actual words that are being spoken by Polish interlocutors of Claude Lanzmann in his Shoah. As everybody knows, this wonderful, huge, and very, very important film, I wanted to say documentary, but this, of course, is something that can also be debated, was as if showing the process of translation on screen. So Lanzmann asks his questions in French. There's the interpreter who translates the questions into Polish. Then you have the Polish people answering back, and then she puts all this linguistic material, all this linguistic production back into a neat sentence that is being translated into French by her, and then also used as a basis for the English subtitles, which have been used as a document in English-speaking world studying this film. Now, it turns out that there is a lot that gets lost in translation in a very, very basic way. So things that have not been heard by the interpreter, have not been translated, never were included into the English version of the text. But on the other hand, what this project teaches us is also that even if you try to be very, very precise in getting the words into the other language, you're not going to be completely successful. You're not going to translate what is going on there during the production of memory, the production of testimonials. So this process is linguistic, of course, but also cultural and also anthropological. So our plan is to not just translate it into English, although we're struggling with that. You can imagine how terribly difficult it is, because there are dialectal traces in the language that the people use. There are some specific site-specific elements that are unlegible, ununderstandable for people coming from outside. There is a lot of historical context to be discussed. There is all sorts of cultural, religious aspects to the scenes, etc., etc. So we are trying to translate that, but we're also trying to gloss this material, to explain it, to try to understand what is going on in the scenes of memory production, of testimonial production. So coming back to what I said at the beginning, it's not just about loss. It's about what happens when people try to get their messages, their very important existential experiences across any kind of bridging any kind of gap in the communication, but especially linguistic gaps. And I think we'll see more examples in what my colleagues are going to talk about from different contexts. And also it leads us, of course, to the question of the role of English in scholarly and historical, especially as historical exchange.
Yes,
right,
yes.
So that much from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would also like to note, to inform you that Posocomes, we are actually starting an initiative, and this is part of our thinking of this really interesting and important topic about to connect with the different studies of languages and to conceptualize some kind of course that would actually help future translators with this kind of issues and questions. But now I would like to ask Cornelia maybe to take on from here, as she is parallelly, how to say, she is managing parallelly 3 different languages and is expressing herself in them. So Cornelia, please could you take the floor now.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'd like to have a look at this issue from a different vantage point by focusing on the burden of language, and more specifically by explaining how certain linguistic and cultural peculiarities shape the reception of research concepts. And I'd like to explain some developments that I could observe in the last couple of years as someone coming from Eastern Europe and working Western Europe, by focusing on one of the most well-known and successful concepts in memory studies, at least from a historian's perspective. That is the concept of lieu de mémoire, coined in the 1980s by the French historian Pierre Neurin, usually translated in English as sites of memory or places of memory, although Neurin himself is happier and more satisfied with the translation realm of memory. As all of you know, the concept relates to events, people, or historical phenomena in which the collective memory of a group, usually a nation, crystallizes. And as said, this was one of the most successful and internationally popular concepts in memory studies from a historian's perspective. But there was a certain specificity as far as this reception is concerned. And it might be related to the fact that in some European languages, it's not possible to make the groundbreaking distinction that it's possible in French, which is the distinction between the symbolic and the geographic dimension of the notion place or lieu in French. I mean, in French, we can make a difference between lieu de mémoire, which means, which relates to the symbolic dimension of a historical phenomenon, and site de mémoire, or lieu de souvenir, which means, which relates to the geographic dimension. And as mentioned, there are other European languages where this distinction works, like for instance, German, where we have the clear difference between Erinnerungsort, where we have this clear difference between Erinnerungsort and Gedenkstätte or Erinnerungsstätte. You can see these notions now on the slide. But in other languages, for instance, in Polish or Czech, it's linguistically impossible to make this distinction between the geographic and the symbolic dimension of the notion lieu. And this means more concretely that the Polish term for lieu de mémoire, miejsce pamięci, can be the linguistic equivalent of both a symbolic realm of memory and a geographic site of memory. Furthermore, in the practical language use, the Polish phrase miejsce pamięci is more likely to be understood in its purely topographic sense, referring to monuments, statuses, and memorial plaques, which are usually associated with the Second World War. That is to say that the very term miejsce pamięci is marked by a strong connection with patriotic memory and the history of mass violence. And there is even a phrase, places of memory and martyrdom, whose meaning blends in completely with the French lieu de mémoire, but in the Polish original, it relates precisely to the history of suffering and mass violence, and is associated with monuments, if not even cemeteries. A similar development, a similar situation can be observed in the Czech language, and this might partially explain why historians in both countries were rather skeptical about the usefulness of the French concept of lieu de mémoire, and why there is basically no project that would be comparable to the project by Nora and other scholars from other countries. Last but not least, there is also a development that we can observe in East Central Europe, I mean, across the region since the late 1990s, that is the very association of the notion memory with institutes of national memory that have a very specific political agenda. And this, I have the feeling, even deepens the skepticism of many historians as far as the usefulness of the very concept lieu de mémoire is concerned. So this example shows how linguistic and certain cultural peculiarities may make the import of research concepts difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cornelia. Now let us jump to a different time zone and also to a different language circle and cultural circle. Ji Huyen, thank you once more for participating, especially considering the time that you have now. So please, can you provide us with your seeing of this topic?
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Since Magda and Cornelia has focused on the cultural, linguistic, or symbolic translation, I'd like to change my approach to this translation object from the viewpoint of political instrumentalization. Let me pick up one conceptual word, national nihilism. I do believe that it was Stalin who used the term of national nihilism for the first time in the official site to criticize internationalist trend or to nationalize Bolshevism. But when this national legalism was introduced to Poland, even before Polish October, it was 1955. When the Polish the essayists introduced the term of national legalism to criticize Stalinist historiography. Actually, Stalinist historiography is a very strong tendency on internationalism in the Polish context after the Second World War. In a sense, the critique of Stalinist historiography used the term of national legalism to criticize Stalinist historiography and Stalinist history education in People's Poland in early 1950s. But interestingly enough, when that national legalism was introduced to North Korea, actually the Kim Il-sung has used the term of this national legalism to criticize a revisionist who searched for de-Stalinization in North Korea. So the Kim Il-sung used the term of the national legalism to criticize de-Stalinization, the faction, and then the Kim Il-sung criticized these guys pro-Russian or pro-revisionist faction who do not regard tradition of North Korean communism. So we can see the turn of the national legalism in Stalinist Russia. It was used the term to nationalize Bolshevism, but also in People's Poland in early 1950s, even before Polish October, it was used the term as to criticize the Stalinist historiography. And then when it was introduced to North Korea, the national legalism was the term used to criticize de-Stalinization faction in North Korea who tried to reform the communist system in North Korea. But most recently, interestingly enough, we can see the revival of national legalism in Japan. So-called Japanese infamous revisionist schools began to use the term of national legalism to criticize critical historiography or critical history education in Japan. So those guys who try to introduce to remake Japanese history education in the spirit of nationalism and patriotism, they began to use the term of national legalism to criticize the critical history education in Japan. So in a very short sketch of this history of translating national legalism or traveling national legalism from Soviet Union to People's Poland and North Korea and today's Japan shows how the translation, although the linguistically correct translation, it could be very easily politically maneuvered or instrumentalized depending on the political context. So I'd like to emphasize once again this political aspect of translation, though the linguistic and cultural or symbolic translation was rather accurate, its political meaning could be totally different from one side to other side, depending on the political situation. That's all, Madam.
Thank you. Really interesting, and maybe we will have now a really interesting step to Samir. I mean, when we were discussing and preparing this panel, we were actually talking about bad translations. So maybe if you could now give a take on this correct translation, but that was distorted, and what is happening when the translation is bad.
Yeah, thank you, Lana. Thank you. Well, it is not exactly, it's bad translations or difficult translation or untranslatable concept, as Magdalena just said. When Magdalena said there is no untranslatable concepts. First, for example, I am just thinking when she was talking about that for example, the concept of enthusiasmus. Enthusiasmus, it is a concept coming from the Greek tradition, which is mean that who has in the theos God inside. No, enthusiasmus. So when we want to translate this enthusiasmus into the Greek or the Jewish Christian culture, this concept, it's not confirmed with the religion because it is polygamy, right? So it's a polygamic concept. And when we want to translate it into Arabic language, which is also monotheist, we face this problem. So there is a concept who is untranslatable, sure, but there is also a concept who is bad translators. No, a couple of weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago now, I had a speech in an international congress also about populism. So I was talking about the failing of the Arabic revolutions and why the Arabic revolution is failing in view of the populism. So one of my counter speakers asked me if this is a populism problem or if it is a democracy problem. So I said, no, it is a translation problem. Why? Because people are misunderstanding the introduced concepts. The concepts are not being translated as they are, not being understood as they are. For example, the Chinese, I think here maybe Jay, he can correct me, have much better information about the Chinese concept, but the Chinese ambassador to the United Nations through the negotiation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, he said he was doubting about how they will introduce the word human rights into Chinese language because it's unintroducible. So in Arabic language, many of these concepts just terminated to be transliterated, not translated, but transliterated. Mean democracy, it's mean democracy. It's written as democracy. So it's written only in Arabic letters as transliterated, not translated. So when somebody just was some who was in coma and just wake up and found these words, have no idea what they mean because they are transliterated, not really bring in the concept of the language of what is it. This is a specific problem, contemporary problem in the Arabic context, because indeed Arab people in the history was the first who translates. Arab people was the first who translate the old Indian and the ancient cultures and bring it into the Latin and then bring it to the Occidental world. So today Arabic translators, they just become lazy and missing information to translate. For example, the word populism. If I have a book published, there is a book published in 1962 who studied the populism in Islamic history. And he referred the idea of populism to the year 62 of the Islamic era. So populism exists. Why today Arab people have no idea how to translate the word populism, and then just they put some words like sha'buniya. Sha'buniya is a word that just has no sense. It's it's no sense. It doesn't mean nothing. Sha'buniya, it means people in plural being together. I don't know how they compose the word, but the word exists, and it exists in the history. There's literature about it, so there's missing internal connection. No, and the same about the democracy. This which we are putting on the screen. It's really nice examples which I give before. Somebody asked Gaddafi, the ex-president of Libya, what's mean democracy? Because democracy is not an Arabic word; it's transliterated. What's mean this? And then he said, democracy, it is demo in Arabic language, which is mean eternity. No, demo, and kursi, it is chair. So, or throne. So it's the eternity in the throne. Democracy means eternity in the throne. That's it. So why? Because the word has no any correspondence in Arabic language. Other question today about memory is the same. Memory is being understood as melancholy, or as melancholy, or as undetermined memory. I mean, I don't know how can I explain it, because they say khulud. Khulud, which means eternal memory, memory in the eternity. It's a catalytical memory. No, it's remote memory. So it's not being understood as live memory. No, and there is misunderstanding what is the function of memory. No, so many times I assist to some congresses about historians in Arab context, and they are asking what they would do, how they should document the oral memory, and they want to document the oral memory as history, and then they write the history as oral memory. This is a methodological problem which is existing in the Arabic school, in the Arabic context, and even the Lumi de Memoir, which Cornelia said. In Arabic language, lieu de mémoire, it's being understood as, or being translated as مرافق الخلود or نصب الذاكرة. So what is it? It is mean the place of eternity, no, the place of the permanent memory. So it's not the lieu de mémoire. What it's mean, the lieu de mémoire, it's the place of it's not lieu de mémoire or place of lieu de l'éternité. Alors, it's very difficult, the concept, and these are problems of introduction more than problems of translation, no? And as G said, and I think it was the key concept, it's being translated with this manner due to political instrumentalization, no? Due to political instrumentalization in Arab context, because of missing of freedom of studies, freedom of education, of academy. So they are being just introduced for political purposes. I don't know if I exceed my time, so I will let it for the discussion.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. These are really interesting topics and problems that you have addressed. And now I would like to ask Alicia if she could close this first round. Please, Alicia, you are coming from a big world language, and could you please share with us the problems you have tackled and mapped in this area?
Yes, Lena. Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be part of this intriguing debate. Military dictatorship ruled in most of Latin America between the mid-60s and the beginning of the 90s, depending on the country. Since the mid-90s, memory studies realm emerged and accompanied the struggles for memory and justice against human rights abuses committed by the military. A major effort was made by scholars such as Elizabeth Jolin and Steve Stern, that from Argentina and the United States of America headed a multidisciplinary group of researchers from Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Peru, and the USA. And today, most of them are renowned academics that have developed a vast amount of work expanding memory studies in multiple directions. In 2013, an interdisciplinary network for social memory studies was created in Argentina. Its participants collaborate with MSA Latin American Regional Group, and one of their main concerns is the need for resignifying concepts and terminology defined in the field of the Holocaust studies, adapting them to the South American context. REAMS also aims to incorporate into global debates other terms and concepts elaborated by human rights organizations and even by transitional governments to name situations related to what had happened during the dictatorships. Now I'm going to present a few examples of those terms. Firstly, terms that emerged in the local setting. First one, detenido desaparecido. It is probably the main concept defined in the southern cone of America and disseminated across the globe. It names people who were secretly kidnapped and remain in that condition, not alive, not dead, just missed, disappeared, as Argentine dictator Jorge Videla cynically stated in 1981. However, as Professor Gabriel Gatti has explained, in 2006, this term was adopted by the United Nations as a legal category that conceptualizes a variety of human rights abuses far beyond the original meaning and context. Second term, hijos y nietos, children and grandchildren of detenidos desaparecidos, who were babies appropriated by military families as part of the dirty war against political opponents. Although these words may seem transparent for readers of Roman languages or even English, they may miss the meaning and the social cultural background behind these terms. Secondly, terms that were redefined, resignified from the Holocaust studies realm. The key word here is concentration camp. This concept was used in Latin American memory studies in the 90s, but was quickly replaced by more specific terms, such as clandestine center of detention or center of detention, torture, and extermination. Professor Pilar Calveiro has pointed out that some detenidos desaparecidos were allowed to go out from the clandestine centers, maintaining the same condition and being obliged to return to their cells in the nights. From her perspective, the power of those clandestine centers went far beyond the limits of their buildings. Accordingly, the idea that a concentration camp is a segregated space may not be suitable for the Latin American context. Finally, third part, two pieces of repressive jargon. Chupado, swallowed. This term names the person that was kidnapped and placed in a clandestine center while their destiny was decided by the repressive forces. Traslado, transfer. This is a euphemism utilized to refer to the murder of detenidos desaparecidos. To wrap up, the problem here is not a literal translation of these words, but the meaning behind those terms. If you don't have the background, you will not get the meaning. In this frame, contextualizing, situating the terms in translation appears as a critical task for memory scholars and practitioners. Thank you.
Alicia, thank you very much for this interesting contribution. We have a question for Magdalena. Misha, can you please read it?
Yes, and while I'm doing that, I just want to leave up this presentation, which combines all the different terms that the participants sent us when we were preparing this panel, and that they just discussed in their different contributions. Okay, now let me find the chat. So what I find really interesting, if I can just say a few words myself, is that in this first round of the discussion, we've really had a whole panorama of cases of gain in translation, cases of unequivocal loss in translation, with most of Samar's examples from Arabic, cases of sort of relatively unsuccessful translation, as with the idea of lieu de mémoire in languages such as Polish and Czech. And then also cases of sort of creative reinterpretation of certain concepts, both in Jae-hyun's example of national nihilism, but also I think in the extremely important examples that Alicia presented of terms that originated in a non-European context and which remain in Spanish, but which have sometimes been adopted and adapted in non-Spanish speaking countries to refer to new realities. So we have actually two questions for Magda. One is from me, which is very brief. What is the language in which you're going to publish your work on the Shoah? So is it, are you just doing this in Polish, or are you also translating everything into English?
Well, thank you for this question. We have actually published already Polish and English version of a couple of essays connected with one scene from Shoah, and we plan on publishing a whole chart, which is, you know, like a huge table containing the Polish and in our English translation to be, and also we want to include a column with the existing English translation, just to make this a kind of, you know, a tool for anybody who'd like to compare and to see what is going on in the language. So we hope to be able to publish a bigger material in English, of course, which also only makes sense, although of course we are very intent on having that in Polish as well, because it's so important for our local context, which we'll probably discuss in a minute. The locality.
Exactly, yes. Before we get to that though, there is a question in the Drifter Q&A also for you, Magda, from Barbara Ronchetti. Those participants who are following the session on Drifter will be able to see it, but since some people are watching us in the live stream, I'm also going to read out that question. So Barbara writes, thank you very much for the interesting issues you posed. In the fascinating process of shared cultural and linguistic experience, it is relevant to recognize what is lost in translation. How do you consider the investigation of what is gained in translation? How is translation capable of enriching or influencing the culture of arrival, in Evan Zohar's terminology, and in Bakhtinian dialogical process to enrich or influence at the same time the culture of the original through translations?
Well, thank you very much. This is a huge issue, and you refer to Evan Zohar and to Bakhtin, who both worked with literary translation, especially Evan Zohar, who produced the model of polysystemic thinking translation, whereby we see translation as a process going on in the target context and shifting hierarchies there. So there is a definite gain in the sense that changes are being introduced into the target culture. But I think we should leave that for a moment, because I was trying to think of your question in the context of memory studies, and obviously and translating this kind of material. And obviously there is always gain in translation, in the sense that there is an attempt at communication, and there is a chance for the one who remembers, the one who gives testimony, who testifies, to be heard and to be recognized as giving this valuable material to other people. And I think there is always a gain in communication, but there are very complex processes at work here, I think, and both Samer and Ji-hyun have given us examples of how it's at the same time a transfer of words or terms, but and at the same time it's a transfer of concepts, and these are not this is not the same thing. I'm absolutely positive about that. It's, transfer of words, if they are transliterated, is is completely apart from what happens in human understanding of what these terms mean. All right, so you can call it a gain, you can call it a danger, that there is a change in the conceptual change, while the transfer of terms seems to be simple, and transliteration would be the best example here, I think. So there is always interpretation involved. Right, and we translation scholars always remember about that and repeat that again and again. And sometimes it even seems boring, but it really is the center of what is going on. Okay, there is somebody who is going to try to understand, to grasp the meanings. Now, given the different background or different conditions or different environment, this attempt at understanding may seem very strange, or may seem very problematic, or may seem very easy, while not being that. All right, so I think there is a lot to research here, and the difference between terms and concepts, I think, is basic here. I don't know if it answers the question, but thank you very much. It gives me food for thought. Thank you.
Right, and as we move into Samer, did you want to comment on that? Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Because this question which you just put on table, it is very studied by religious studies, biblical and Toratical studies and Islamic studies, Quranic studies, mostly by the biblical and Toratical studies. They invented a concept which is named interpolation, interpolare. This word interpolare is not being accepted in any dictionary, modern dictionary today, but it is a Latin word, interpolare. Interpolare, it has been referred by Mamison in the Romanian law, where he said, where you are bringing something old and you give it a new aspect, and you give it a new face, a new presentation to be modern. So when they translate the old words from the Bible, from the original Bible through the centuries, they make interpolare, to bring it new again into the contemporary usage of the language. So they interpol the old into new, interpolare. This concept, when you in translation, it's very maybe not acceptable, but it's improve when you ask how if translation can improve the word. When in religious studies they do, but in other disciplines they don't. But it's very accepted in religious studies. They do interpolation. In Jewish and Christian studies, and in Islamic studies is forbidden. So just this idea, still to be developed in translation studies. It has been referred by Mimicin in 1909, but still developed by linguistic studies. And maybe Magdalena has more information about that. Thank you.
Well, I could just add very short comment that a lot of work is being done in the post-colonial context as well. So there is probably a scholar whom probably you know, Lydia Liu, who's been studying concepts used by the colonial powers in China, and then which were kind of fighting back onto the English with a different meaning. So yes, of course, I mean, this is a huge and very, very complex field of study.
And this is an absolutely perfect segue into our next topic, which is about the global dominance of English. Before introducing that, however, I would just like to remind everyone that you can post questions and comments both in the Drifter system, if that is what you're using to follow the conference, or using any other social media, and they will all arrive here. And if we have time at the end of the session, then the panelists will respond to them. So when we had first conceptualized this panel, actually we wanted to talk about 3 different topics. So we've now discussed the first one, which is loss and gain in translation, and the second one is the increasing pressure to publish in English that we experience as academics, and the effects of that pressure, which of course has become, a requirement to advance your career and even to experience any kind of job security. And this is coupled with the refusal by English language journals, or at least the top English language journals, to consider papers that are already published in other languages, right? And what this means is that many important publications written by scholars working outside the English-speaking world reach their original communities with some delay and after double translation. So that is one topic. The other topic is internal colonization. So there's been a lot of debate about the global inequality between Western scholars as concept producers and Eastern or Southern scholars as mere data providers. But there's also a similar imbalance within a lot of countries between multilingual, internationally connected researchers and their monolingual peers working in the same countries. And when we did a trial run for this session, we realized that actually these 2 topics, so the pressure to publish in English and the internal colonization that results from it, are so interwoven and interconnected that it's really impossible to separate them. So we want to have just one second round of discussion in which our panelists will address this complex of issues, the kind of both the challenges and maybe the opportunities created by the global dominance of English. And we also realized when we had our trial session that we have widely diverging opinions and solutions to the challenges that this poses. And in the second round of the discussion, you will be able to hear all these different replies. So in this round, we would like to start with Cornelia. Cornelia, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the pressure to publish in English is a matter of fact. If we want to make our research visible, and more pragmatically, if we want to apply for international grants, we have to publish in English. And I'd like to share with you a couple of thoughts of what does it mean, and talk about the practical and conceptual implications of living and writing in more than just one language and more than just English. I mean, practically, the necessity or the will to publish in a local language, in a small language, and in English means much more effort. because it takes more time and it takes more energy. So this is the negative aspect. But the positive aspect is that when we write in more than just one language, we are forced to think in a more precise way. This is at least my personal experience. When I have to translate myself from one language to another, I'm forced to precise my argument. And then when looking at the bright side of life, again, another advantage is that when writing in my native language, which is Polish, I have the opportunity to provide the reader with much more detail, with much more local specificity than it would be possible in English, because the necessity would be to provide English reader with much more context. It would be necessary to explain much more details. And when writing in my native language, I can just be more straightforward and just sell the interesting things. But perhaps more important are the conceptual effects, the conceptual implications of the pressure to publish in English. And here I wanted to share my own experience with an attempt to introduce some concepts that were developed at the margins of memory studies into the mainstream of memory studies. Some time ago, I worked together with a colleague of mine on the history of the Polish sociology. And we could discover that, and we could document that in the interwar period and then after the Second World War, some Polish sociologists developed concepts partly in parallel to, for instance, Marx, and partly concepts that even preceded theories and ideas that were developed in the 1970s and 80s. But if you would like to use these concepts when writing in English, these local Polish concepts, then we would have to explain them first, and we would have to translate the original text because they are not accessible on the international book market. So again, it requires much more effort. But there is another thing that is perhaps even more risky or dangerous, and a colleague of mine called this Gerhard Zimmermann trap. First, I should explain perhaps who Gerhard Zimmermann was. He was a fictional Czech figure that was presented as a universal genius and one of the greatest Czech playwrights, poets, composers, teachers, travelers, philosophers, mathematicians, and inventors, which means someone who invented the telephone before Bell, who wrote Three Sisters before Chekhov, and who created the Eiffel Tower before Eiffel. And again, Gerhard Zimmermann did not exist, but Czech people believed in his existence. And when trying to introduce these local concepts, local traditions and memory studies into the mainstream of this field, I very often had this feeling that what I wanted is not. I just kind of create this Gerhard Zimmermann trap, because implicitly, I suggest that these local Polish scholars went first. I mean, that they were able to develop some ideas before Marx and before Müller. And it's true to a certain extent, but it's not really plausible, because then there were some breaks of traditions. The concepts were not developed in a major way. And most importantly, they were simply internationally not recognized. So this conceptual risk is perhaps the most important lesson I've learned during the last couple of years, that it's an interesting experience just to try to understand these local traditions and concepts, but a practical attempt to work with them, to use them, and to introduce them to the international public is a very difficult matter. Thanks.
So that actually sounds like quite a pessimistic conclusion, because it means that we can do the historic of kind of unearthing something really interesting decades after the fact, but trying to influence current debates based on those discoveries proves extremely difficult.
I mean, I would say that we have perhaps more chances to do this now because we work in English. I mean, English is now also the language that we use, and these local scholars at that time used their local languages, which means they had it definitely more difficult than we have it now.
Right. Thank you, Cornelia. Samer is next. What is your take on the difficulties and perhaps the opportunities posed by the dominance of English? You're muted.
Yeah, you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
I would just take one of the sentence which Cornelia said. When I write in my language, I can go deeper because it's my language I dominate. So if I write in English or in other languages, which is not my language, I become in unfair competition with others who are writing in their mother language. So they can go deeper. I will still superficial. So what will happen here? This is the subjective problem, but it will bring us to an objective problem. There is an interesting work from Alan Donald, where he writes about the age of mediocrity. Why? Today, most of the academic work in the world are mediocres. Why? Because we have to write in English, because English is international language. Then the academic production, it is mediocres. We can't go deeper because we are not native, right? This is the first problem. Second problem, if I will give my experience, because in my case, indeed, I don't belong to nobody, but indeed, I belong more to Spanish concept and to Spanish language. Today in Spain, it is more accepted to write in English than write in Spanish. Even if you write in Spanish, you don't get paid. And if you write in English, you get paid. Most journals today, if you write in English, you get double paid. And if you write in Spanish, maybe even you don't get accepted. So, and nobody care about the quality of the language. This is what's happened in this side of the world. In Arab world, when you ask me about my experience in others, in Arab world today, most of the Arabic universities requiring their scholars to write and publish in English, bad English. Nobody control the quality of that English. So they created another English, lingua franca inside Arab world, which is illegible and understandable, but they do with it. I will not refer to specific countries, not the universities. Most of the universities in Arab world today publish in English. Okay, I will give you an example. For example, I had an article some months ago. I had an article which I published it in Spanish language. It got published in 2 places in Spanish, and somebody translated to Italian. And then a friend suggested me to publish it in Arabic. Why not Arabic? Because I'm talking about Arab world. Why not publish it in Arabic? I rewrote my own article in Arabic language, but I give it another dimension because it's addressed to Arabic speaker. And then I send it to many journals. Nobody accepted because it's already published in Spanish. So they don't accept an article already published in another language, in their language, that they accept to be published in English. Okay, so I think this is a problem of dominance, which is indeed just a dominance of English language and bringing us into a fiction of publication, a fiction of academic production, and it's just an academic fiction. No, it's mediocrity, as I started to say. It's just academic mediocrity, which we are doing today. No, you write in English, but indeed your article, which impact had? No, if you write in English and you send your article to an Oxford journal, has to be reviewed by three reviewers, so you will not be accepted, or it is translated by someone, and the translator here will not be exactly impossible to say exactly what you want to say. So you're not going deeper. The translation is superficial, and then the academic production is superficial. This is so. I think I suggest always everybody and myself write in my own language about everything. When I want to write something about Spanish concept, I write it in Spanish itself. When I want to write something about French concept, I write it in French, and I'm not going to translate this. No, if they will not want to point me for this is, I don't know. My mind, I don't go translating something. I mean, I'm not going to translate something to other language which I thought about it in other, because I will miss many ideas in the target between the stimulation, the articulation of my ideas until that I write it. So I'm really against that. So also with Cornelia's idea. Thank you.
Samet, maybe this is the time very, very briefly to mention what you told us when we were preparing about the role of translators trained at universities in the Arab world, because I think that's really a fascinating, very important structural point.
Yeah. The question is, to study languages or to study translation in Arab world, most of the people are coming from foreign schools or having lived in foreign countries or study in foreign schools. So the people who study in foreign schools or international schools, they don't study Arabic language, or they are not really perfect in Arabic language. So they come to study in translation schools, okay, and interpretation faculties, and they get perfection in the target language, but they are really missing their own language. So they wanted, when they come to translate, they are missing the language because they haven't studied the language itself. So what they do, they can, where they can translate, they transliterate. They transliterate the words. Suddenly, even now I'm reading in politics in Arab world. Suddenly, the word of colonialism, it's appeared when you look in Arab literature since 1990. You find words colonialism, which is populism, strategy. All these transliterations emerged since 1990, which doesn't exist before 1990. What's happened? No, I don't know what's happened with this. If we make a study really about the Arabic literature before 1990 and after 1990, there is a sudden revolution, which is scientifically not acceptable. Nor the language need to be progressed. But in this case, since 1999, there is too many transliterations instead of translations. No, so they just because these translators didn't study properly the language. Their own language, and they dominate English. Sure, they dominate French, absolutely, but they don't dominate Arabic language. When you come to the notes, there's many countries in Arab world. When you come to the students' notes, you find their notes 90% in French or in English and 50 in Arabic. So how can this person can be translated? And this is the mascama.
All right. So Samer's position is very clear. It's a very pessimistic look at the situation, certainly concerning the relationship between Arabic and other languages. And now we move on directly to Alicia, who I know has a much more optimistic outlook and also some very specific suggestions, which I think are relevant to the MSA.
Thank you, Misha. Thank you very much. Thank you to Samer for introducing the point of English as a lingua franca, which I will try to address from a different perspective. Globalization and the internationalization of higher education and research has come along with the spread of English as a global academic lingua franca. However, the increasing dominance of English has triggered debates that are far from over and have reached the Latin American scenario, including the memory studies realm. The critics of this trend argue that the prevalent position of English will have detrimental consequences on local academic communities, which could wipe out whole regions as irrelevant for creating knowledge. The Latin American regional group has expressed concern regarding the English dominance in MSA, which affects significantly to academics in a region where only a minority of the population is fluent in English. Although the huge amount of quality research produced in Spanish and Portuguese in Latin America, paraphrasing Professor Renato Hamel, we should be careful with the fact that our region may be wiped out from the memory studies field just because their research findings are not written, presented, and or published in English. On the other hand, it impedes the exchange of ideas between academic communities that could collaborate and benefit mutually. What could we do to get out of this impasse and move forward? Well, as Misha mentioned, I have two very simple proposals. Firstly, advocating the implementation of a multilingual approach in memory studies that goes beyond English monolingualism. As Hamel suggests, the need for applying a vigorous plurilingualism relies on the theoretical and epistemological risk that English monopoly poses for the creativity of science and equal opportunities for research communities around the world. On the other hand, the second proposal is advocating for the acceptance of different varieties of English that depart from standard English norms in both oral presentations and mainly in publication. Today, 80% of English speakers around the world are non-native speakers that correspond to speakers of English as a lingua franca. This is a contact language and the main means of communication among speakers that do not share the same mother tongue. Likewise, English as an academic lingua franca is the main language within the internationalized academia. Despite this fact, most international journals and publishing houses still ask writers to get their text reviewed by an English native speaker, and of course at their expense. INSEAD, together with incorporating a plurilingual approach in the field and in MSA, it is also required a different perspective regarding the use of English in academia and memory studies. We need to assume that English can be an efficient means of international academic communication, but English is not a synonym of native speakerism, an ideology that gives supremacy to native speakers' norms. By contrast, a multilingual perspective implies the accepting not only of different languages, but also of multiple varieties of English in the academic field. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for these constructive suggestions. If I may, I would just like to press you a little bit on some of the possible consequences of this. So, I mean, on the one hand, of course, the languages that we use are not just a result of our own decisions. It's not just a matter of us getting together and deciding that, you know, we will be one big multilingual family with no hierarchies, respecting each other. There are also issues of power and hierarchy involved. And of course, the fact that we're all now communicating in English is not random. It has to do with, you know, where the financial resources in academia are concentrated, where the institutional power is concentrated, etc. So would you not be afraid that if we start creating journals that are more accepting of non-native Englishes, that those journals would automatically be relegated to a kind of second and third tier position? So that's one aspect of the question. The other one is, I mean, I have translated texts from Spanish into English and other languages. And I know that there are certain concepts that are very specific to Spanish language communication. For example, sectores de la sociedad, right? Sectors of society. And I've seen Spanish language authors use this terminology when they write in other languages, like English. And I've also seen readers from other cultural contexts being just, you know, stumbling over this and really being unable to comprehend exactly what is meant, because that's not the terminology which in sociology, for example, would be used in an English language text. So are you not afraid, and maybe this goes a little bit into Summer's direction, that if we allow a lot of diversity within English language communication, that this would go at the expense of both attention and intelligibility?
Thank you very much for your intriguing questions. Firstly, I would say that intelligibility is critical. You know, the point here is communication, but communication intelligibility is not, again, a synonym of attaching to English, native English rules. English native speakers also need to accommodate, to try to understand other people. It is well known that most native English speakers do not speak other languages, and they will have to be used to doing that, to accommodate, to accept, to understand, to make an effort to comprehend terms that they are not used to use. So I agree with you that the key point is intelligibility and mutual understanding, avoiding misunderstanding, but this is a mutual effort. It cannot rely only on one side of the communication pose, I would say. On the other hand, I'm sorry?
Yes, no, go ahead.
Yeah, on the other hand, your first question, that was that about power relationships, of course, it's obvious. No, but as Latin American, we are very used to how to say, to fighting, to struggling with all these issues. You know, we have really many difficulties when we want to publish in high hierarchy or very prestigious journals because of our language. I think this is reality, and this is something we should, I don't know, that is why I'm advocating for changes. Perhaps I'm a little idealistic, I know, but this is what I really think. I think we need to make changes, and to, for instance, to incorporate the idea of multilingualism in journals. For instance, why not publishing articles in English together with articles in other languages? This is something we are very used to doing in Latin America. For instance, in one of our journals, well, we accept articles in English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish. You know, this is something possible. Perhaps. Thank you very much for your questions.
If I just may put something here, I don't want to open this subject, but just to note it, that Spanish is a big language. And for instance, languages like Croatian, which is my native language, this one hasn't got a chance. And what I think that we have a problem with is that scientists who want to participate in the international arena are starting to think in English, this version of English, which is in fact having an influence on the development of local terminology. That is, the local language gets reduced and is not being developed in memory studies, but also in other fields.
I think Samer wanted to comment very quickly.
Well, it was one comment. Now there are two. One for Alicia, when she said just now, she said that they start to accept articles on other languages. In Spain, I'm not talking about her journals or the journals she referred to, but in Spain there is many journals now. They accept articles in English, but they give them priority, and this is the problem. Okay, if you write in English, you have priority. If you write in Spanish, they will say, okay, your article is fine, but we cannot accept it because you don't have place. But if you write in English, you will never be declined. So this is the problem. And about your question, what you say when you say that we can create an alternative journals, no, for non-native speakers or for lingua franca, as we say. But the problem is that these journals will not get standardized, will not get qualified, no, they will not get the same score as the first score journals. So you will still publishing in D or C, and the first journals will stay always A and B. So you will stay always in the last. You will be wagons, as we say in political sense, but you will not be wagoning. Always the wagoning, it will be the native speakers. No, in political sense, in imperialism, they say you have to be wagon. you need to be wagoned or be wagoning. So you will be wagoned. You will not be in the first places. This is one question. And just about your comment, one example in law. When Spain,
quickly, please, because we're starting to run out of time.
Okay, when Spain became member state in European Union, due to the translation of the language of the European law, they introduced many concepts to the Spanish law, which had no idea about them. But the problem is that when the Spanish judges and the Spanish lawyers went to the European courts, they also bring to their when you talked about the translation about how they write, they bring to the European law, to the European Court of Justice, Spanish legal concept which doesn't exist in the European courts. Okay, so these problems, because you think you write out what you think, and this is human naturality. This is nature. You cannot avoid this. No, so this is just my point because no time. Thank you.
Okay, I have to apologize for having started this discussion within the discussion. Unfortunately, for reasons of time, we really can't develop this strand of the discussion now. And I would now like to give the floor to Jae-hyun.
Okay, so my favorite motto regarding this question is publish internationally and perish locally, or publish locally and perish internationally. I'm a historian in East Asia working on Eastern Europe. Can you imagine if I publish my article on Polish history in Korean? How many Korean historians can read really Polish materials? Nobody except me. It is very safe for me to publish my article on Poland in Korean only, right? But it makes me too much relaxed because nobody can check against my usage of the text, right? So very intentionally, I used to write my article on Poland in English, not in Korean. If I publish my works on Poland, it's mainly about the sort of public history things. For example, Polish debate on memory laws or certain memory culture. So for the general public intellectuals in Korea can understand what's going on in Poland. So I usually used to divide my work publication into two tracks: the academic work in English or Polish, rather the publicist essay work in Korean. But I think that it does not really solve the question. So this dilemma to which all the non-English speaking scholars used to have is this publish internationally and perish locally, right? But the question is not exactly whether we publish in English or not. This is a rather secondary question. The real question is usually the West, so-called the West, usually provide the theory, and the West usually provide the Western theory with the empirical data. So even those publications in English in the peripheries used to be centered around the Western theory. So they never tried to make a breakthrough in the Western-centered theories. So even though many publications from the peripheries in English, actually this, in a sense, reinforces Eurocentric division of labor in the international academia. That's the real problem. I don't care about whether we publish it in English or in the local language or Arabic or French or Spanish or Polish. The real question in the international academia is this unequal division of labor between the West and the West. As Cornelia said, that there were certain very innovative, certain conceptual development in Poland even before Orwell's. But whenever we are talking about the theory about the memory, we are talking of Orwell's or Assmann and something like that, right? And also, I know the Julian Hochfeld, he was one of my favorite Polish Marxists. He was the one who used the term Marxism otwarty. It's open Marxism already in 1956. But no Western Marxists recognized Julian Hochfeld's work, only through perhaps Zygmunt Bauman's certain reminiscence of Julian Hochfeld, they may recognize this. So I think that this is a certain, a very, how can I say, certain a cul-de-sac of the international academia. So English dominance is not the linguistic one. It's more than a division of labor internationally between theory and empirical data. So I hate to publish empirical data about Korea and Poland in English to provide Western scholars, Western theories with empirical data. But I think that if we publish our articles or our work in English, it could be a certain breakthrough into the Western-centered theories. So if we make use of English publication to make a breakthrough to the Western-centered hegemonic theory, that will be okay. But if we just publish empirical data locally, I think in a sense it also can contribute to the Western-centered theory and the Eastern empirical data. So I think that in that sense, linguistics or the publication language is just secondary one. So how to make change of this division of labor between the West and the rest is, I think, one of the important challenges that we have. So my experience as a historian from Korea working on Eastern Europe, who published some articles in Poland, in Polish and English and German and Korean, tells me that what really matters is that division of labor in the international academia. So we can make use of any language if we can make a breakthrough to the Western-centered hegemonic theories, and then also we can make a contribution to the global theory. So in that sense, I think that the transnational memory studies or global memory studies can be a solution to these today's still Western hegemonic, so-called Western hegemonic and memory studies states. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jae-hyun. That's a very interesting twist on the topic, and also, of course, an interesting constructive suggestion. Magda now has the final word in this round, and I'm really looking forward to what she has to say about this.
Well, thank you very much. So much has been already said and discussed with a lot of passion in many cases. So I hope you will excuse me for using a very general frame for my remarks. And I would like to come back to the myth of the Tower of Babel, the biblical myth of the Tower of Babel. This is something that is an inspiration for all translation scholars in the Western world, at least. As you remember, people got together in order to build a tower, and then God noticed that the tower is so high that they will reach heaven and everything is going to be possible for them. So he decided to intervene, and he just pulled down the tower, and this construction was there was a stop put on this construction. So the standard interpretation of this myth is that it was a curse, right? So we were just one step from being gods, and then this jealous God intervened. But the other interpretation, which I find much more interesting, is that it was a blessing, because first of all, we started to be diverse. We scattered around the world, as the Bible says. So this is the beginning of multiculturalism and the multitude of languages and the or diversity of thinking. And of course, world is more difficult for that, but it's perhaps more interesting and more true. Now, an element I wanted to draw attention to in this story is that it's not that people got together in order to build this tower, but there was this tyrant called Nimrod who decided he wanted the tower built. All right, so the curse really came from power, from authority. All right, so if it was a curse, if it was a blessing, it came from somewhere, from outside the power of the tyrant. Okay, now we can try to understand this story in different ways, but of course the story of English as the global language, however we see it, actually is a story of an authority, of a power, of a tyrant, right? And we have to be able to negotiate with the tyrant. Actually, now there is a blessing in having one common language. So, for example, this conversation wouldn't be possible if we haven't agreed to talk in English, all of us, none of us being a native speaker of the language, actually. So we are ready to risk in a certain way, and also we are ready to hear criticism of the way we use English. But I would like to speak also on behalf of small language. I work from Polish, and this was my basic degree, and my basic education is in Polish philology, Polish literature. Also, when you think about memory studies in Central Europe, so much of the material, so many documents are in Polish. Some of them have never been used in the international market because they are in Polish. Another thing connected with Nimrod again is that there is a political stamp connected with the use of particular languages, for example, as far as Holocaust studies go. It's a separate issue, of course, but this is all the time. It's not just language, it's also the political power behind it, or the political stigma on it. So this is something we should bear in mind when we discuss about the getting together or splitting. One of the characteristics of the humanities, and memory studies are the center of humanities, I think, is its multilingualism, and also the fact that we don't produce so-called big data. We produce small data. They are local, and they are rich because of their locality, right? So the concept of bibliodiversity is something that I hate myself speaking about should, we should do this or that, right? But I think there is an issue here for us as humanists, or students of the humanities, to foster bibliodiversity, to see the richness and the impact of the small data coming from different parts of the world. And of course, this has already been mentioned by the speakers here in this panel, when we thought about the in-depth study as opposed to the superficial study. Now, another thing I wanted, and perhaps the final one I wanted to mention, is the importance for me of doing research in my own language, and also publishing in Polish, and translating into Polish. I am a translator of literature from English into Polish, so from global to local. But what I also do with my students, and I think we've been very successful in that, is that we translate academic books in translation studies, which is an international English language discipline, global discipline. So we've been translating important work from the international translation studies into Polish. And surprise, surprise, what happens? These books are quoted, and these scholars from the international market get introduced into the Polish discourse on this sector of the humanities. And I mean, this is a little victory perhaps, but it also, for me, is important as a way of fostering Polish language, Polish academic thinking, the way in which we are able to do valuable work, perhaps outside the center of the global market, but perhaps we should not care for the Nimrod values as much as for the real value of our work. I know this is idealistic, but let's perhaps stop here at this idealistic note. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, in a way, this is a part of an answer to a question that was posed really interesting in our chat by Joanna Wareszniak. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly. She has a two-part question, and I will read them now, and maybe if each of our panelists would take half a minute to answer one bit or another, or maybe everything, but really, really concise, because we are almost at the end. So the first is, I would like to still press you a bit more about practical consequences of this conversation. Any small steps worth undertaking in the memory studies field among memory scholars from below, as it is difficult to change the world of the top academic journals? And the second, what can we do to build on the pluralities of languages in the field of memory studies without breaking our association into the archipelago of groups which do not understand each other's concepts and traditions of thought? So please, how can we start? Who would like? Alicia, you are unmuted, please, and then Cornelia.
Well, I've answered Joanna on the chat box, but anyways, I would put her your question, Joanna, in a different order. I would say, how could we avoid breaking our association without incorporating linguistic diversity? I think that this is a topic that raises many debates, and we need to be able to find a way to increase diversity without breaking our association, of course, but expanding it. So, well, this is a challenge. This is the challenge for the future. I have no definite solution, of course, but I think we should work together in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelia.
Yeah, in contrast to my rather pessimistic thoughts, I have three productive ideas. One of them would be to translate local classics into English. Another idea would be to create a special issue of, for instance, memory studies dealing with the specific analytical variety of concepts and theories and methods across the globe, not just in the big countries, big important countries, but really across the globe. And third, another idea would be to create a cross-cultural syllabus on theories and concepts in memory studies. And if there are people interested in working on this, I'd be happy to be part of these kind of projects.
Thank you. Yes, please, Joaquin. Yes.
Joanna, thank you very much for your question and suggestion. I think that one of the viable options is to creolize English. I mean that we shouldn't be obsessed with the authenticity of English as a language. So I think the usual language are following ideas. Once ideas are set up, then we can find a way to express our ideas, actually whose vocabularies are not in English yet. So in this sense, translation still works. So this is first one. The second one is perhaps a very practically, and it's MSA in the end of the year, like Oxford English Dictionary always introduces new English words from different parts of the world. Also, the MSA can make a glossary of different languages, right? And in the end of the year, and also we can distribute these new glossaries of the memory studies, which originated in different parts of the world in the end of the year. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I mean, in this way, we will actually expand our knowledge and possibilities of thinking with development of language that wouldn't occur in the domestic environment. Samir, please, I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Lena. I have just a question and even a comment from G and a question to Alicia and to Magda, both of them. What do you think if in this panel today we have another English native speaker, English or American, with us? How we would feel ourselves cognitively in this conversation? Surely we will be dominated by that native speaker, and surely we will feel inferiority or be vagunated, as I said, by that native speaker. No? So now we feel it's everything okay, as Magda said, because we agreed all as a lingua franca in this debate, in this conversation, because there is no native speaker. But when there is a native speaker between us, surely we will be following what he will guide us all, and we will feel inferiority this moment. I see that G he's not agreeing with. Thank you.
Magda, please, and then.
All right. Well, no, I'm not that afraid of English native speakers, I must say. For myself, perhaps I'm not self-critical enough. I don't know. But what seems to me important, what seems important to me, speaking of native English, is to again to differentiate between using language as a means of communication and using language as the only space you work with. So I cannot see why in any discipline, in any field of scholarly activity, why, while we agree to use one language, say English, global English, why we forget that there is publication in other languages as well that should be acknowledged, noticed, and given attention to. So any association like MSA, for example, could have, I don't know, agree on people looking into linguistic areas every year, and I don't know, finding 2 or 3 very important things that should be translated into English and getting them published in English or translated and circulated. So I think, you know, this of course is difficult and it means work. In International Association for Translation and Intercultural Studies, there is a policy of making all conferences multilingual, which means a lot of work and a lot of money, okay, because we have people translating into the local language of the place where the conference is, even if everybody really uses English, okay, but perhaps it's a gesture, perhaps it's a symbol, but perhaps it also is a sign of attention to the needs of those who do not feel English is enough. And I think we should all actually believe that English is not enough or not the only language.
Magda, thank you. That's a wonderful last word. I would just like to add, maybe from myself, that when we had our trial run 2 weeks ago for this session, we also tried playing around with actual interpretation. So we had several volunteers who actually did a very good job of translating bits of our conversation into Polish and Tamil, interestingly. But we realized then what a massive technical challenge it would be to provide that as a guaranteed service for, you know, even for one panel, let alone for a whole conference. But I would encourage us to think, you know, more creatively about playing around with different languages. So, for example, allowing one person in each panel at MSA conferences to speak in one of the other major languages, as long as they also have a PowerPoint presentation in English, or maybe have, you know, a few panels at each conference in languages other than English, but on the condition that not everyone in this panel is a native speaker of the language that is being spoken, or, you know, other experimental kind of trial balloons. And on Magda's idea of the bibliography, I just want to end just the way that we began with an advert for Posocomes, namely to say that we have a bibliography group as part of Posocomes, which has been extremely active for 2 years already, I believe, and is systematically collecting relevant publications in the field of post-socialist and comparative memory studies across different languages. And if anyone listening to this is interested in participating in this or any other activity on the basis of Posocomes, then once again, you're extremely welcome to join our business meeting on Thursday at 9:30, or the Working in Regional Groups Roundtable tomorrow, or have a look at our website. So once again, thank you very much to all the panelists in all the different time zones who were with us tonight or today. Thanks everyone for listening and participating. I'm sure that this is not the end, but the beginning of our conversation. We've collected lots of interesting practical ideas for where to go from here. And I'm really hoping that throughout this conference, and certainly until we all meet again, I hope physically in Seoul next year, we will have practical results emerging from this discussion. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good night.